Amongst all the ministries in the government, perhaps the maximum interaction customs has with any other ministry is with the Ministry of Commerce, which frames India's foreign trade policy, various rules and regulations. And in fact, the FTP, that is the foreign trade policy and the rules, have also to a great extent impacts the working of the Indian customs, and accordingly the customs policies and rules are also framed. Hence, various schemes governing import and exports, which is announced by the Ministry of Commerce, is implemented by the Ministry of Finance by way of a notification. Therefore, customs acts as a regulatory authority as far as foreign trade policy and its implementation is concerned. Hello everyone, my name is Viren Dayal. I'm a custom broker, LSC certified trainer in customs law, applied rules and regulations.
For latest updates, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon.
In this video, I'm going to discuss how to read the foreign trade policy and what are the various compartments or segments in a foreign trade policy. The current foreign trade policy, friends, was made and the act was known as the Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act of 1992 and the Draconian Act which was prevalent then, that is the Import Trade Control and Export Trade Control, was repealed to pave the way for introducing India to the world as a reliable partner of quality merchandise. Chapter 1 of the FTP relates to trade facilitation and legal framework. Under the concept of delegated legislation, the FTDR Act has its own inbuilt mechanism to announce foreign trade policy, which earlier started from a 5-year policy such as 2004 to 2009, 2009 to 2014, and finally 2015 to 2020 with yearly supplements and yearly changes wherever necessary. This was the framework till about 2020. However, in 2023, on 31st March, the government announced a fresh policy and it has done away with the concept of a 5-year revision, but it will be a continuous process of supplementation and revision wherever necessary. Let me now analyze what each chapter says of the foreign trade policy. Chapter 1 talks about trade facilitation and legal framework. So the highlights of chapter 1 is that it talks about DGFT as a facilitator, the hand-holding of importers and exporters by the government to promote export, and the objective of the FTP is laid down in Chapter 1. Chapter 2 mainly talks about the general provisions for imports and exports into India. This chapter mainly divides the import and exports into 4 categories. One is free, restricted, prohibited, and imports and exports through state trading corporations, mainly government organizations. The word free means OGL, Open General License, means an importer or exporter is allowed to bring into India goods or export goods without any compliances or restrictions in most of the cases. That is why it is termed as free. However, although the term free is used, there could be conditions such as actual user condition which can be imposed under the provision of the foreign trade policy. Secondly, when the goods are restricted in the policy, they are subject to certain compliances or certain licenses, permits to be taken prior to importation into India or exportation of India. As an example, if the product is covered under the SCOMAT items, special chemicals, organisms, materials, electronics and technologies, the exporter has to obtain a permit from DGFT. The category which says prohibited goods are absolutely prohibited from imports and exports into India and cannot be imported at all under any circumstances. And the fourth part, canalizing agencies or imports and exports through state trading corporations, requires an NOC from notified designated agencies of the government, and upon obtaining the NOC, imports and exports activity is permissible. This chapter further subdivides the government's policy on import and export of gifts, import and export through courier, re-imports, import and export through baggage, and so on. Importantly, this chapter makes it mandatory for any importer or exporter who wishes to commence commercial activity must obtain an IEC code, import export code number, which is an alphanumeric code obtained now online, and it is linked to the PAN number of the importer or the exporter. So these have been the broad features. An important feature, which is chapter 2 of the foreign trade policy. In the new FTP, the government has introduced chapter 3 as developing districts as export hubs. In order to augment the exports from the country and to create more awareness, especially for MSMEs, farmers at different decentralized setups and different districts pan India, the government will now participate along with the state government to recognize towns of export excellence, will help to find out newer markets for the products and thereby showcase more products from India than what was being done hitherto. This initiative will augment more and more exporters to come forward at various levels and will start exporting and gain benefits. The next few chapters, namely chapter 4, talks about the popular advance authorization scheme for both goods as well as the diamond sector, which was earlier popularly known as the DEC scheme, is covered in chapter 4, and this scheme has continued even in the new policy. Chapter 5 talks about again the export promotion capital goods scheme, but has made some minor changes to allow the importer to bring in the capital goods in the country up to 24 months instead of 18 months, but the other feature of the scheme more or less remain the same. Then schemes on EOU, SCZ, deemed exports also continue in the successive chapters of the foreign trade policy. A new chapter, chapter 8 on quality controls and trade disputes, has been introduced in the foreign trade policy. Exporters need to create an image, maintain an image, and recognize India as reliable partners. With more and more people now projected to become exporters in the coming few years, trade disputes, quality disputes can surface and needs to be correctly addressed. Hence, under the foreign trade policy, there will be a nodal officer who will take care of various complaints on quality, quantity, and similarly, even complaints of importers against the foreign suppliers can be addressed through this particular forum. Committee on quality complaints and trade disputes will be formed at the DGFT level, and they will act as a nodal agency between various stakeholders, importers as well as exporters, to address grievances, complaints, and so on. For the first time in India's foreign trade policy, a cross-border initiative to promote exports through the e-commerce platform has been introduced and is taking shape under the new policy. The digital economy now has its place in the foreign trade policy to augment India's exports on various kinds of products and also through the post office, etc. This is a new vista open to encourage small artisans to showcase their products to the e-commerce platform and gain mileage by exporting them. The government has allowed private participation besides public-private participation and will be initially set up with the help of private players. The state government and the central government will join hands to promote exports through the e-commerce platform or the digital economy platform in the given coming time. The foreign trade policy basically gives a legal framework, as we have discussed right now, and the object of the government. In order to implement the various schemes, the objectives, in the second part of the foreign trade policy is what is known as Handbook of Procedures. The Handbook of Procedures lays out how various applications have to be made for advance authorization, EBRC, IEC code, exempted categories of the IEC code as an example, and various schemes which are there in the foreign trade policy, how they have to be implemented in terms of the bonds to be given, and how do you obtain a license online, and such parameters are given in the handbook of procedure. After that, we have in the foreign trade policy what is known as the Ayat Niryat forms or the various appendices. Ayat and Niryat is import and export. Then we have the standard input output norms, that is SION, and that is mainly pertaining to the advance authorization and the DFIA scheme, that you have a nexus between what is imported and what is exported. So for the advance authorization, the SION is the principal and the main book or the main chapter which is used to find out what kind of product we are going to use. So the SION has various chapters for chemicals, for dyes, for engine export promotions, for iron and steel, and so many different items are covered in the SION. And the SION determines the amount of imports you can bring and the exports you can bring. Any advance authorization or any EPC license generally is not cancelled by DGFT unless the importer and the exporter is convicted or is accused of the COFE POSA provisions on the foreign exchange laws. The last part of the foreign trade policy is known as ITC HSN, Indian Trade Classification, which is aligned to the HS code, and the Indian Trade Classification adopts the 6 plus 2 8-digit classification of each and every products covered from chapter 1 to 97, and for India also chapter 98. This is how the policy is framed and regulated. Once the main objective of the government's policy is announced and the implementation is done by handbook of procedures, the various ayat niryat forms, appendices for that, list of SCOMAT items, then we have the standard input output norms, and then finally the ITC HSN, which is aligned to the Customs Tariff Act 1975. So this is the broad framework of the foreign trade policy and how you are supposed to approach it to take your export and imports further.
For detailed learning of all logistics subjects, visit www.logiveda.com.